And so just like during the morning reflection, these determinations of Saka, the last two, to always be truthful and then to quickly dispel anger when it arises, those are really contained within the precepts, those types of determinations. And I thought just for the teaching this morning, do a couple more readings, and then we'll really focus more on the meditation practice, on doing the practice itself, rather than giving a lot of long teachings. So I'll do a couple more readings, short suttas from the Saka Samyutta in the Samyutta Nikaya 11, and then follow up with reading the first chapter of Contemplative's Craft by some transcribed talks from Luang Por Vīradhammo around 2008. So these teachings of Saka, also known as Indra, in Thai we say Prat in Devarat, Indra, the Lord of the Devas, King of the Devas. Now we have, this is Saka Samyutta, Sutta 22, it's called Ugly. At Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, there the Blessed One said this: Bhikkhus, once in the past a certain ugly, deformed Yaka sat down on the seat of Saka, Lord of the Devas. Thereupon the Tavatimsa Devas found fault with this, grumbled and complained about it, saying, "It is wonderful indeed, it is amazing indeed. This ugly, deformed Yaka has sat down on the seat of Saka, Lord of the Devas." But to whatever extent the Tavatimsa Devas found fault with this, grumbled and complained about it, to the same extent that Yaka became more and more handsome, more and more comely, more and more graceful. Then, bhikkhus, the Tavatimsa Devas approached Saka and said to him, "Here, dear sir, an ugly, deformed Yaka has sat down on your seat, but to whatever extent the Devas find fault with this, that Yaka becomes more and more handsome, more and more comely, more and more graceful. That must be the anger-eating Yaka." Then bhikkhus, Saka, Lord of the Devas, approached that anger-eating Yaka. Having approached, he arranged his upper robe over one shoulder, knelt down with his right knee on the ground, and, raising his joined hands in reverential salutation toward that Yaka, he announced his name 3 times. "I, dear sir, am Saka, Lord of the Devas. I, dear sir, am Saka, Lord of the Devas." To whatever extent Saka announced his name, to that same extent that Yaka became uglier and more deformed until he disappeared right there. Then bhikkhus, having sat down on his own seat, instructing the Tavatimsa Devas, Saka, Lord of the Devas, on that occasion recited these verses: "I am not one afflicted in mind, nor easily drawn by anger's whirl. I never become angry for long, nor does anger persist in me. When I am angry, I don't speak harshly, and I don't praise my virtues. I keep myself well restrained, out of regard for my own good." And then the next one is Sutta 24, Saka Samyutta. At Savatthi, now on that occasion 2 bhikkhus had a quarrel, and one bhikkhu had transgressed against the other. Then the former bhikkhu confessed his transgression to the other bhikkhu, but the latter would not pardon him. Then a number of bhikkhus approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, sat down to one side, and reported to him what had happened. Blessed One said, "Bhikkhus, there are 2 kinds of fools, one who does not see a transgression as a transgression, and one who, when another is confessing a transgression, does not pardon him in accordance with the Dhamma. These are the 2 kinds of fools. There are, bhikkhus, 2 kinds of wise people, one who sees a transgression as a transgression, and one who, when another is confessing a transgression, pardons him in accordance with the Dhamma. These are the 2 kinds of wise people. Once in the past, bhikkhus, Saka, Lord of the Devas, instructed the Tavatimsa Devas in the Suddhamma assembly hall. On that occasion recited this verse: "Bring anger under your control. Do not let your friendships decay. Do not blame one who is blameless. Do not utter divisive speech. Like a mountain avalanche, anger crushes evil people." And I'll read from this book, Contemplative's Craft, Internalizing the Teachings of the Buddha. This can set the mood for the next meditation session. And I consider this kind of a Classic talk. Connection and alienation. An essay by a friend entitled "The Face of Wonder" had me contemplating wonder and its significance in life. I started to reflect on the time when I was walking near my mother's home in Ottawa and suddenly saw a dozen pigeons sitting on a telephone line. The sky that day was very clear, very sunny, and very blue. The pigeons were all puffed up to stay warm. It's quite clever the way birds do that. So there was this lovely image of a row of puffy pigeons perched against this deep blue background. Ah, it was one of those moments when a sense of wonder arises. The mind stops, and there's just this. There's only the way things are, just as they are in that moment, without any analysis or mental comment. I like to think of this as connection. We might also consider the opposite of connection, alienation. There are many kinds of alienation. A more blatant kind of alienation is when a refugee experiences a sense of not belonging, of being out of place, of not being connected. But there are also more subtle types of alienation and separateness. When we're daydreaming or fantasizing, we're not connected to the way things are. We're just lost in the habits of our emotions and of our thinking mind. It's rather like the habit of needing to eat junk food. The habit itself comes from a place of non-peace, and the final result is not nutritious. Unfortunately, it stimulates and strengthens the desire to consume more junk food. As the ad goes, bet you can't eat just one. Just think about the hindrances to meditation: dullness, worry, aversion. They're all disconnections. They aren't connected to life as it is. When we're lost in drowsy, foggy states, obsessive worry states, or judgmental, critical states, that's not being connected to the present moment, is it? More to the point, these are states of dukkha, which is the Pali term for stress, unease, unsatisfactoriness, or suffering. So we might say that alienation adds to our suffering, whereas connection diminishes our suffering. It might be helpful to think about how connection can take place. Let's say there's a little old lady crossing a very busy street. For an old person whose eyesight isn't so good and who moves slowly, the simple task of crossing a busy street at the traffic light can be quite challenging. This simple act can produce a lot of anxiety. So imagine that you're out walking and all of a sudden you see this little old lady's predicament and you think, oh, that's so difficult for her. Your own personal concerns and mental wanderings fall away and suddenly you're connected. So compassion is one way of being connected. Or perhaps the situation is more joyous. For example, you're waiting in an airport lounge and you notice a loving family heading out on what might be some adventure. The genuine laughter and warm interactions of the children and parents touch you, and you smile at their good fortune. You're happy for their happiness. Again, without any analysis or mental comment, you're connected through appreciative joy. In so many ways, life offers us a mode of being, whether it be wonder, compassion, or appreciation, that's not self-serving and narcissistic. We bring to mind these, moments of connection. We can begin to cultivate the heart in such a way that these experiences of connection aren't merely the accidents of circumstance, but rather the results of our own aspirations and intentions. So how do we transit from alienation to connection? What bus gets us from A to C? Well, if the means condition the ends, then we have to start with connection. Therefore, our first task is connecting to the way things are. We do this by being awake, present, and mindful. Let's say I come to the morning chanting and I'm feeling grumpy and uninterested. Because I'm feeling this way, I don't like the sound of the chanting, which strikes me as too slow. I'm now critical of the monks and novices and so on. If I'm not aware that this is simply a passing mood of the mind and I'm identified with it, not any ultimate reality, I fall victim to the mood and suffer. This is alienation. If, on the other hand, I think that I shouldn't be this way and I start feeling guilty, I also suffer. This too is alienation. But if I simply allow myself the time to be aware that this is just a mood and it will change, I'm once again connected to life. Consequently, the first step on the path from alienation to connection is becoming aware of how a mood begins, is maintained, and ceases according to causes and conditions. Awareness is thus the initial step on the path to connection. However, things don't stop there. Let's imagine that I'm feeling quite annoyed at someone. For me to be truly connected to life as it is, there would have to be an awareness as well as a profound acceptance of that upwelling of anger. To accept something profoundly, you have to feel it in a pre-verbal way. You can't simply have a kind of commentary up in the brain saying, I know I'm feeling a bit off. Instead, you have to experience the mood in a wholehearted way, noting how it feels in the body. That's connection. When you stay connected throughout the life of that mood, for a minute, for an hour, a day, the sense of alienation can't get a footing because the seemingly endless inner dramas aren't being fueled. This is staying connected to the Dhamma of change. Being connected to the Dhamma of change means you're aware of the objects that enter consciousness from the time they arise until the time they cease. This kind of sustained connection is the bus from A to C. As you practice being aware of objects, such as moods, from the time they arise until the time they pass away, you develop insight. You begin to realize that it's not pleasant to attach to objects that are constantly changing, so you stop holding on to them. When you stop attaching to these objects, they lose their capacity to overwhelm you. For instance, you might be very inspired by something, such as a heroic story of adversity, a profound and moving insight, or a generous gesture from a stranger. You feel that inspiration, but you also realize that it's only a movement through consciousness, something that arises and ceases. So while we can still appreciate inspiration, we don't attach to it. We don't let it become something that drags us into disappointment as the emotional charge of that initially pleasant feeling inevitably peters out. Inspiration doesn't drag us into disappointment because we're now connected to something deeper, a clear understanding that anything that comes also goes. Practicing awareness therefore means staying connected to the way things are. So we ask ourselves, how do I stay connected to the way things are? This is a helpful way to ponder our practice because it doesn't require that we have to have a certain quality of experience. In other words, staying connected to the way things are doesn't mean that we always need to be happy or compassionate or like everything that's going on. If we simply stay connected to the way things are, there isn't any kind of qualitative judgment about who we are or what we should be experiencing. That's a relief, isn't it? If we keep practicing in this way, we have the potential to connect to a sense of wonder. But this may not always seem possible, especially when we're in the midst of experiencing something very uncomfortable. However, if we just stay with the way things actually are, we begin to detach from our perceptions about the way things should be. When we detach from our perceptions about the way things should be, that whole egotistical side of us that has the strong sense of self and other is being put aside. That's when we can begin to feel a sense of wonder as we connect in a more vivid, direct, and heartfelt way to the world around us. But we can't just create wonder by desiring it, can we? Go out there and create wonder. If we think to ourselves, I'm going to create wonder, we can't do it because it doesn't work that way. And we can't generate a sense of wonder by trying to get rid of things. For instance, we don't want negative states of mind, so we try to get rid of them. When we do that, we block our innate capacity for wonder and connection, which are totally accepting. In fact, they go against the grain of the desire to reject or get rid of something. It's desire that creates alienation, takes us away from the way things are. On the other hand, connection, or the recognition and acceptance of things however they are, attractive or unattractive, appealing or unappealing, grounds us in the reality of the way things are. That grounding is what leads to wonder, because you, with all the likes and dislikes attached to you-ness, are getting out of the way. That's the odd thing about non-attachment. Non-attachment is actually connection. In the English language, we have the word detached. As meditators, we may be tempted to think, I should be detached. But it's not that simple. If you push away an emotion you don't like, or if you blame yourself for experiencing it, you become more attached to it. Conversely, when you're open and connected to the way things are, to the impermanence of all conditioned things, non-attachment arises naturally. On meditation retreats, you sometimes have to sit through some really awful memory patterns. You can have a day on the cushion when all these negative emotions keep coming up. When that happens, we can think we're having a terrible retreat. Then the next day, the mind is just empty. At that point, we think, well, why can't I just do the empty bit? We don't see that the two things are linked, and that the act of bearing witness to those painful emotions without getting caught up in their drama leads to their falling away. That's how our potential for wonder comes into being. Now our attention is freed up to notice the beauty or goodness in the world, or whatever it is that fills us with a sense of awe or gratitude. That sense of wonder and connection is based on the practice of the Noble Eightfold Path factor of right effort. Right effort, which seeks to cultivate wholesome qualities and abandon unwholesome qualities, is grounded in an awareness of the way things are. As such, right effort is attentive, investigative, and focused on cause and effect. For instance, if a complaining mind state arises, we make a point of being aware of it and accept that it's there. That's the attentive part of right effort. Once we're aware of that mind state, we can then shift our focus from the narrative in the brain down to the feelings of the mind state in the body. That's the exploratory part. Finally, we notice the effect that changing our focus in this way has on the mind. If we find that this shifting of our focus helps to keep us from getting caught up in our moods and storylines, then we can regard it as skillful and choose to cultivate it. That's the part of right effort that explores cause and effect. Wrong effort is quite different. Wrong effort is grounded in a lack of awareness. For example, if we instinctively try to do away with a complaining mind state by thinking, "I shouldn't feel this way, I'm such a bad person," we're oblivious to what's actually happening. Wrong effort also manifests as heedless reactivity. We latch onto a thought as soon as it arises, without exploring whether or not we're acting skillfully. A final result of this grasping and subsequent reactivity is that we're unaware of whether we're making our state of mind better or worse by acting in this way, which means that we fail to notice cause and effect at work. Noticing and accepting negative states of mind is something we can learn to do. In fact, learning to look at negative states of mind by being aware of them and staying with them is a very good habit to develop. As we train in watching the restless mind in everyday life, we experience a sense of acceptance, a sense of connection. By using acceptance as the basis for our practice, we can then pick up other practices in a skillful way. For example, if we have an attitude of acceptance when it comes to the restless mind, we can use the breath as a skillful means by which to calm the mind without falling into a willful need to control it. When contemplating the desiring mind and the accepting mind, it can be useful to reflect on the Four Noble Truths. The second of the Four Noble Truths states that the attachment to craving is the cause of suffering. The third Noble Truth maintains that the abandonment of craving is the cessation of suffering. In a sense, acceptance is the abandonment of craving. Acceptance doesn't involve fighting or trying to analyze anything. Instead, it comes from knowing, right now, it's like this. However, there can be a lot of struggling leading up to that sense of acceptance. We can get completely caught up in the stress of trying to get rid of this and trying to become that. When we get caught up in this way, we should stop and ask ourselves, what does this feel like right now? At this point, we can become reconnected to the way things are. I once met someone who had just been through a divorce. Feeling extremely lonely one day, this person went out for a coffee. In the coffee shop, there were 4 people with kids, all laughing and enjoying themselves, and a young couple completely engrossed in each other. Needless to say, this individual felt even more lonely and alienated. Of course, what this person was doing was projecting an unsustainable ideal of perfect companionship onto those other people. There was no recognition of the fact that each person in the coffee shop, from the children to the young couple, was experiencing a mood that wouldn't last. This person also failed to realize that the feelings of loneliness is not unique to one person, and that those other people would, at some point, also experience loneliness. It's one thing to feel lonely, but it's quite another thing to be identified with the feeling of loneliness to the extent that we build up a sense of self around it. Being the lonely person is alienation, whereas really getting in touch with the experience of loneliness is connection. And those continue to be our choices, connection or alienation. We can learn to see moods and feelings for what they are, i.e. not self, or we can construct a strong sense of self around them by clinging to them. Imagine that this person had employed a different strategy. Instead of going to the coffee shop to feel less lonely, they had gone there to observe loneliness in themselves and in other people. This doesn't happen too often, does it? Feelings like loneliness can make us look for distractions, or they can make us project all our needs and aspirations for overcoming our loneliness onto other people in an unrealistic way. When we're enmeshed in our experience of loneliness, We tend to see wonderful qualities in other people that just aren't there, or at least they're not there all the time. And when we project onto other people in this way, we can become disappointed in them. We can think that they aren't what they're supposed to be, even though they never promised us they'd be a certain way. This behavior is pretty common when we're seeing others from the perspective of alienation. Our perceptions about them aren't coming from our being in touch with how they really are. I've been describing how a sense of wonder and connection stems from our ability to be aware and accepting. But if we think that we're practicing these things in order to feel wonder and connection all the time, then that would just be another desire mode we're getting caught up in. As humans, we have the profound possibility of touching a deeply silent and compassionate way of being quite naturally. So when we sit in meditation for an hour, we're engaged in a very deliberate exercise in connection. As Ajahn Chah would say, if your meditation makes you peaceful, accept it. If your meditation doesn't make you peaceful, accept it. It's not the quality of the experience that counts, but rather our being connected to the experience. This acceptance I'm referring to is not simply an intellectual action. Staying connected is an attitude you bring to life. This is a sentence I'm going to read again at the end of the reading. I'll read it a second time here. It's not the quality of the experience that counts, but rather our being connected to the experience. Of course, it can be challenging trying to remain receptive to a difficult experience. Much of my early monastic life involved sitting around waiting for the meal to start, waiting for the food to come out, waiting for Ajahn Chah to come out, waiting for Ajahn Chah to stop talking, waiting for the food to be passed out, waiting for the chanting to end, and worst of all, waiting for the monk in front of me to start eating. That was torture. I was a rather greedy little novice, stationed at the end of a line of 50 people. When we sat down to eat, there were 2 rows of monks with Ajahn Chah in the center. The etiquette stated that you wouldn't start eating until the person senior to you had started. Being the last of 50 monks isn't so good. The greedy mind was focused on the food. Then, inevitably, you would have an ascetic young monk sitting just senior to you who was going to contemplate his food a little longer before taking a bite. I could have strangled him, but I just had to wait. Meanwhile, the mind is saying, "This is a waste of time, let's get on with it." Just sitting and waiting was excruciating, and yet it was a very good training because you had to surrender to the situation. There was nothing negative happening, and certainly there wasn't a problem if you didn't make it a problem. Yet the mind would make it a problem by becoming critical and judgmental. What to do? When the mind becomes critical and judgmental, we just stay with that experience and wait. That capacity to simply wait goes against the impulses of the controlling mind, the desiring mind, the repressive mind, the judgmental mind, the impatient mind. It goes against the mind that wants to fix the situation or get rid of it. Oftentimes, this mind doesn't give us a chance to allow an experience to come to us that we can learn from it. This is especially true if what's coming up seems to be ugly, negative, unpleasant, or difficult. So we make the effort to develop the patience and determination to just be with these difficult states of mind. There doesn't seem to be much of a payoff when you're enduring a challenging state of mind, but it's actually building a foundation for peace. It's laying the foundation for a calm, connected mind. In this way, we learn to endure impatience, and that's transformative. We recognize the impatience, we watch it, and eventually it falls away. We do the same with restlessness and all of the other hindrances. We sense these things when they're coming up, but we're just with them, rather than willfully repressing them. We breathe with them and accept them. We accept them again and again. So, do contemplate connection and alienation. Contemplate how they work in the mind. Contemplate the meaning of letting go into a sense of wonder. Contemplate the sense of stillness and emptiness that results from that. Exploring these important ideas will help us in our quest to know peace. So that's the end of that reading, and just to drop something into the meditation for contemplation. And also we can sit and walk as we see fit until 10:45. If some of us want to sit longer, we can do that. If some people want to go do walking meditation in the rain, or find a sheltered spot out of the rain and do walking meditation, be welcome to do that as well. And so for our contemplation, just repeating this sentence a third time, because I think it's so important and it points to the true Dhamma, the way of practice. It's not the quality of the experience that counts, but rather our being connected to the experience.